Hello and welcome to Business Agility Live again. It's a total pleasure for me today with two amazing guests we have, two thought leaders, book authors, and true leaders in their field, Stephen Parry and Katie Anderson. Katie will be introduced by Stephen because Stephen today is our host. It's my pleasure to introduce Stephen Parry. For those of you who don't know him, he's been at our conferences already twice. Once in New York City at our main conference, and last year at the Business Agility Conference in Vienna. Stephen is a truly recognized expert in the field of lean, organizational design, culture, leadership. He's a book author, speaker. Most of you might know his book, Sense and Respond. And yeah, Stephen is probably an amazing person just to follow in these challenging days where people don't know where to go to, what to look after, how to basically make your business transformation a success. It's my pleasure to welcome Stephen and Katie. And hello.
Hello.
Hi,
Thank you for that introduction. So it is my pleasure to say a great big welcome, and we're really privileged to have you at the moment. Katie Anderson, the author of what I believe is going to be a best-selling book and a milestone in lean leadership. It's called Learning to Lead and Leading to Learn. There we are, on cue. And we didn't practice that. I think this is quite a remarkable book for a number of reasons. How Katie came to write this, her relationship with a number of people in the leadership at Toyota. So I'm hoping to bring out some of the stories behind the book as well. And we're going to dig deep into some of the psychology of the leadership and some of the humanity at the center of all of that. So we will get into that very shortly. But first of all, I have to say, Katie, I've been watching your book tour. You must be exhausted. How is the book promotion going?
It's going really well. I have to say it's much easier with the book having been published now, not like working on the final steps of the book, plus also promoting it. And it's a real thrill to now be able to talk about the book and share it with other people. I have to say the editing process at the very end was a big challenge, but I'm really excited just to keep amplifying the lessons that I have learned from Mr. Yoshino, who is the subject of my book. And the lessons I've learned about leadership over a lifetime. So it's my privilege and honor, and I'm thrilled to be speaking here today with you, Stephen, and thanking Mike for inviting us to come together.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen some of the reviews. The reviews are quite remarkable. So I'm going to say right off, I'm a fan of the book, and it'll probably come across in my questioning. But this is really about you, and I would like you to just paint a thumbnail sketch of how you got to this position of writing this book. Because there's, how did you get interested in lean? How did you get involved in Toyota? And how come you wrote this book? So I'll just leave this to tell us that journey.
Yeah. Well, I'll share some of the highlights here because I want to be able to also get into the meat. But it's really kind of an interesting story of serendipity about how things in your life can come together and intersect in a way that was totally unexpected. I came from a healthcare background and actually worked in public health and academia for many years in my previous career. And how I got interested in lean and performance improvement was I took a role at a children's hospital here. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, so at Stanford University, and started practicing lean then. And really my lean and performance improvement journey sort of mirrored sort of what I had learned about lean and performance improvement, that it's really not about the tools, it's about developing people's capability and mindset. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward about 7 years of me going through that journey and supporting the organization and another healthcare organization, I decided to start my own consulting practice. And amazingly, within that same year, we had the opportunity, my family, to move to Japan for my husband's job. And as a lean practitioner, I couldn't believe what an incredible opportunity that was for me to go learn about Toyota, go learn the roots of lean and the Toyota production system at the source. And even more amazing was that I was at a conference speaking about 6 months before we moved to Japan. It was maybe about a month after we found out about the opportunity for my husband. And Mr. Isao Yoshino, who is now the subject of my book, who was John Shook's first manager at Toyota. And for those of you who don't know who John Shook is, he was the very first non-Japanese employee of Toyota Motor Corporation in the early 1980s, when Toyota was thinking or starting to make ventures overseas. And Mr. Yoshino was in charge of the training program for the American managers at the NUMMI training plant, or the NUMMI plant, to come over to the US. Anyway, they were on stage talking about their role of manager and subordinate. And I got a chance to talk to Mr. Yoshino at that conference, and he gave me his card and said, look me up when you come to Japan. And so I did, of course, and I was very excited at that point to know, oh my gosh, all right, if anything, if I have one day with this amazing Toyota sensei, like, my time in Japan is going to be incredible. And little did I know that that very first meeting in April of 2015 would become not just a once in a lifetime experience, but would become one of the most important relationships probably in both of our lives in the last 5 years. So we started spending time together. I just jump on the Shinkansen, the bullet train, and go down and spend the day with him. And he allowed me to write about our conversations on the blog I had just started. And people were very interested in these insights that I was gaining from these conversations. And our relationship deepened as we spent more time together. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I moved back to the United States in just 18 months later, he and I continued to this pattern of our relationship of getting together. He visited me in the United States. We started to partner together in Europe, in the US. And we had this idea of I knew that I was learning so much from not only the history and the insights that you couldn't read anywhere else, from his direct experiences of what I consider some pretty pivotal times in Toyota's history, when it was really making intentional decisions about the culture that we sort of take for granted when we hear about Toyota today, in terms of its real focus on people and on learning and on strategy and communication. And he was there at all of those moments, but also just the real wisdom he gained over 40 years. And I wanted to be able to share that with other people. And so he agreed that let's write a book. I would, in sort of that same pattern of our blog, of he would share his experiences with me, and I would write. And this collaboration has resulted in a much bigger book than I anticipated. But the stories are rich, and I really wanted to capture that experience, not just of success, but of failure, and really one person's human journey of learning. So that's sort of the backstory of this. But who would have thought that summer 6 years ago, just finding out about an incredible opportunity of moving to Japan would result in this collaboration between an American woman and an older Japanese gentleman to write a book.
Yeah, and I think the style of the book for me is interesting, because I learned a lot of facts about even John Shook's career, and there was lots of information about how he started, which he's never told anybody about. And you got to see these characters at work, literally. And it was very interesting in how the relationships were set up. And I think a big feature of this book are about relationships, and relationships that are fostering learning all the way through. And the other thing I get from this book, it's part history for the aficionados, if they want to have that, and there's a treasure trove for that alone. But it's also a bit of a biography, and there's some philosophy all mixed up in this lovely mix. And I have to tell you, to lead into the next question, what I liked about it was its elegance, its simplicity, its calmness and reflection. And my next question is that a feature of your writing style, or was that something that was just in the air as you were writing it?
I would say it's a combination of the two, and the writing process was not, and the discovery process of these stories was not something that just happened in one instance. Just like this, so I'd say the meta story actually of the book is about reflection and of collaboration, and how we can look back and really learn so much more when we go back and start piecing the history together, going a little bit deeper and understanding. And so it's like almost like the fabric gets more clear, more in focus because of that. But I also was very intentional about how I wrote the book. I originally conceived that it would be, maybe 10 leadership lessons. I always knew I wanted it to be based in storytelling, but I thought maybe each chapter would be really like one lesson and then a few stories in between it. But as I was starting to write, and as I was doing more and more interviews with Mr. Yoshino and asking more questions, I realized, except for a few short vignettes of like little sort of smaller stories, one's experience is not just neatly fit into one sort of category or for one learning. And I realized that telling the real journey of someone's experience, and this is a real person, this is not a fictionalized story, allows us to then, reflect maybe more on that experience and think about what that means for us. And there's no right or wrong answer out of the story or the experience. So it allows each person to take what they want and they can from the experience. And so I was very intentional about that, as well as how I wrote the book on sort of two dimensions, one about following a clear goal, about the concept of warp and weft, of weaving, how we have strong goals in our lives that really help us continue to persevere and that are the anchors for our life at different phases, either a lifetime goal or different things. And then what we learn and discover along the way through failure, through hardship, through success, and how that really then intersects to create a sense of purpose and of our legacy as leaders and as people. So
I think that metaphor was instrumental in providing structure for the book, because otherwise these pieces would have been slightly disconnected. And what I like about that metaphor, this tapestry that came from these different directions, was it allowed you to see things over time in one picture, or a mental picture over time. So I think a lot of things held together because of that metaphor. So where did that metaphor come from?
It came in collaboration and through these discussions with Mr. Yoshino. As I was starting to sit down and write and really think about how was I going to structure this book, I remember saying to him, I really feel like there are two strong threads of purpose that really have united your life. One is this really strong desire to live an overseas life, to go to the United States, and all the things it took for him to do that. And the other is this real sense of passion and purpose around developing other people and helping other people. And he shared with me this Japanese philosophy around the concept of warp and weft. And I knew from that point on that was going to be how I needed to tell the story. So I discovered it. I sort of was discovered in partnership, but then I really ran with that idea about how do we tell the story on two dimensions, and really how do we use that as an opportunity for ourselves to reflect on our own lives about what are the things that really have carried us through our lives, and then where are the things that we've learned along the way. And also in writing as well, you mentioned earlier it was part history, part biography, and part leadership philosophy. And I had to make some intentional decisions. I could have gone a lot deeper into some of the technical concepts in the book, and there'll be other opportunities for that. I wanted to provide enough context for people who were not familiar with Toyota or for Lean, so that they could really access the leadership learnings in the biography of it, as well as provide enough detailed history for those of us who've been in the world for a little while, and those tidbits that you might be more interested in, and to create that balance. And there are more resources on my website as well. But it was I really wanted to focus on the leadership and the learning journey and the humanity of what it means to be an imperfect leader working for an often imperfect organization that is striving for perfection. And as Mr. Yoshino says, the only attitude or the only secret to Toyota really is its attitude towards learning. And so that's the other thread that comes through, is about learning to lead and leading to learn. How do we learn for ourselves? How do we learn to be leaders? And also, how do we lead to then create learning in our organizations with other people in this sort of cyclical way?
And it's at that point he brings out the three dimensions. Very simple, but I'm sure they're very difficult to put in place and take a lot of discipline and practice over time. Can you tell us about the three segments and just elaborate a little bit about that? Because I think this is what sets this book apart. Some people will say it's the same thing that other people have said, but when you read the book, it's how they're executed, and it's how the relationship with people evolves from these three simple measures.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, and to give a little context, this framework is one that came out of a quote the very first time I heard Mr. Yoshino speak. This is right before he gave me his business card at that conference. And he was on stage with John Shook, and he said something that was just an ordinary statement to him. And I'll paraphrase here, that it was his role as a manager was to give John or whomever was reporting to him a mission or a target or a challenge. And as that person was solving towards that challenge, his role as a manager was to support him to achieve that challenge. And as he was helping that other person, he was aware he was also developing himself. And I thought that was so profound and really has become the framework that I see for people-centered leadership. It's so simple, but so difficult in practice. So the leader's role is to set the direction or the target or the challenge, to provide support. So to create those, to help, to coach, to provide the systems and structures, to remove barriers. And 3, to develop yourself at the same time. So know that you always need to be learning yourself. And if we can focus on those 3 things, we're really going to be people-centered leaders who are able to create learning not only in our organizations, but for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I really want to dig into at least the last 2 of those,
yes,
because I think that's where the magic sauce is. Because anybody listening, set direction, provide support, and develop yourself. You can take that at a superficial level. So, well, I think I do that for my staff. But so tell me a little bit about what providing support looks like and feels like for both the leader and the student, shall we call it?
Sure. So actually, first I want to say that having that clear direction is so important as well. And I think in a lot of organizations that I support or leaders that I work with, often there's not that clarity of the direction or the target that people should be working for. So if we don't have that, then it's even more challenging. But providing support, and there's so many stories from Mr. Yoshino's experience, and we can all think about ourselves as well. But it's about teaching other people to learn and providing them the opportunities for learning. So not always giving the answer, but giving them the experience for learning. There's a story that Mr. Yoshino shares from his sort of mid-career when he's in his early 30s, when he was asked to write a report. And the big boss of the Tokyo office in which he was working at the time, when he went to go present the report, he said, well, who did you talk to? How did you get the information? And he said, I was just so busy. I just went to the library and I put together the report. And the boss said, no, stop. You need to go talk to people. Did you go to Gemba? Did you go see? Did you go validate? And he said, I didn't have time for that. And in fact, the boss, later on, Mr. Yoshino found out that the boss knew that the information probably wasn't not going to differ very much. But what was more important to him was teaching Mr. Yoshino the process of doing complete thinking, and that was the right thing to do. And so, I think about that's sort of the providing the support and the challenges. It's also creating a space for learning and to know that you don't have to be the right way. Like he gave him that extra week to have that chance to explore and learn. It's about having a no blame culture and taking the ownership for the conditions for people to be successful at work as well.
Yes, and this is where there's a link to John Shook's earlier book, which is the Managing to Learn, about A3. And I find when I'm teaching A3, people just want to get to the facts. Right. And I think the support is from the manager is, well, I've come to you with this question. Why don't you give me the answer? But that is not the process at all.
No.
The process in John Shook's book is really teaching you the process of how to find out for yourself.
Yes. And in fact, Mr. Yoshino was one of the 2 managers that was John Shook's model for the manager character. It was actually Mr. Yoshino, and then he had a manager who worked, or assistant manager who worked for him. And John Shook reported to that assistant manager, and he acknowledges them in the acknowledgments as the two people who taught him A3 thinking. So it's actually Mr. Yoshino is sort of that person who is teaching John how to do A3 thinking. And again, it's the process. It's being more process focused than outcome focused. And to as Mr. Yoshino would say, it's more important to set that challenging target because it's what you learn from not meeting your target in which you learn more. So it's that process of discovery, and they really embody the sense of plan, do, study, adjust, and that experimentation.
So the lean geek is coming out for me now, right? So there's, I think it's Sanderson is the manager. It was that Yoshino. So
it was a sort of a blend of Yoshino and another gentleman who reported to Mr. Yoshino. Yep.
Okay.
And then Desi Porter was the name that of the character that was really John Shook in the book. Yeah. And interestingly enough, so Desi is not a very common American name, but it was a play on words. So in Japanese, the word for apprentice is deshi. And so he named the character Desi to be symbolizing that he was the apprentice.
Yes. Okay. We have a lot of people from the Agile community here, and there are many debates about collaboration, learning, and systems of big collaboration, small collaboration. And it always gets tied up in the conversations about structures of organization. So much so there's a big debate going on at the moment about trying to get networked organizations and actually designing the organizational structure in networks to enable and facilitate that. So in reading your book, there's a lot of collaboration. And I can see that coming out because the manager who's developing the other person is saying, you need to think about this, but not giving an answer, but giving some direction where it might be useful to go and have a chat. They're building relationships. So, but I don't think the Toyota structures are network structures like that. So let me get to my question is this type of leadership possible in networked organizations or highly structured? How does the structure impact this type of leadership?
So I think that's a complex question, but I would go back to thinking about what's the purpose and what is each organization going to try and do, and in the same way that each organization, each company has different problems you're trying to solve and different cultures in there. But if we are there to really we need to have clear direction, and then how are people being supported to learn and develop? And what I think is interesting is that in Japan, traditionally, it's a very hierarchical society, which is not, where people look up to the leader to give all of the answers. This comes back from the samurai days. It wasn't this thing that Toyota did about having a real mentorship and learning culture. It does come from that apprenticeship, craftsmanship, but not experience or history, but is not how typical Japanese companies are run now. And in my observation, I think Toyota did something really different, which is almost taking advantage of that hierarchy, but to flip it so that the responsibility, it's like the inverted pyramid, the responsibility of the leader is to support the other people. In networked organizations as well, I would say, as long as there is clarity on what direction people need to be going, and there is an opportunity for development and support, then you'll be able to create whatever you need to be able to be successful. But I think it really depends on going back. It goes back to the principles of how are the people within the organization having clarity on the direction, and then from where are they getting the support to develop and grow? And I think there can be different structures that enable and allow that, but it's about creating that clarity. What do you think?
I can't add to the answer that you've got. I think this philosophy and approach is independent of structure. because it's people-based, and about relationships, and that's scalable.
Yeah.
All right, whatever the structure.
Right.
So it's a decision of whether you work rigidly within the structure, and sometimes people are conditioned to do that. But it sounds like with this type of teaching that people are encouraged to go out and investigate cross-functionally, cross-hierarchical, to try and find people that can help with the problem and get their thinking right and get different points of view.
Yeah, and I'll build on that too. I like what you said, that it really is about, it is about the people, but it's also about what are the systems that we create within our organizations, no matter what the structure is, that allows and facilitates, cross-functional discussion, that people know who to go to ask questions. And if you're creating a culture where people are not just looking within their small silo, but really connecting out, that's where you're going to see a lot more acceleration of learning. But that doesn't happen easily. Like even if Toyota, they were very intentional. And I talk about this in the book. In the late 70s, the leadership realized that their structure was actually degrading, sort of back to this old hierarchical model, and that people were starting to be functioning in silos. And so they really reinvested in the structure they call Hoshinkanri, which is strategy deployment, and retaught their senior managers, so the more senior executive levels, about how to have conversations and how to share information and discuss together using, for them, 8 trees. But again, it's what are the systems and structures you're going to put in place in your organization, no matter how you're structured. Yeah.
Yes. And can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the leader and the staff member in terms of their development? I've heard it said that trying to drive out fear and a blame culture is one of the typical things that we find in the West really hard to do. How did Toyota cope with allowing people to make mistakes?
So I really can only speak from this, answering this from my experience of hearing from Mr. Yoshino, since I personally haven't worked at Toyota. I would say in part, it's some part of their culture that always existed. Mr. Yoshino tells a story when he was 22 and just joined Toyota and made this terrible mistake of pouring different paint in. And he was assigned, this is during his orientation, and he was assigned to the shop floor to learn how to make cars, even though he was in a back office business role. And he really made a big mistake that was going to require 100 cars to be repainted. But instead of yelling at him and blaming him, the managers asked how to show how he had done it, and realized that they had not properly labeled the can. So it was very easy to make a mistake. But not only did they not blame him for the mistake, they thanked him for it, because it highlighted that they had not done the proper responsibility of setting up the workplace for airproofing. But mistakes still happen, and Mr. Yoshino will be very transparent that he had a lot of bosses who were not very good as well. So this is not like, oh, everything at Toyota is amazing and it's all a no blame culture. There was a lot of mistakes and challenges and tension at different points in the company, but more and more the leadership was putting intentional focus on the process of learning from failure and from mistake. And so instead of firing somebody because there was a mistake, or even Mr. Yoshino at the end of his career had a business venture that lost $13 million for Toyota, which isn't that big in the greater scale of a company like Toyota, but it was a big new business venture. They didn't fire him. They didn't blame him for this. They took partial responsibility that he had done some things that maybe weren't as effective, but they too had not set the business venture up for success. And so, and they asked him to conduct a hansei, so reflection. And again, I think this goes back to what we talked about earlier, that the meta story here is about learning and reflection, and how do we learn and then apply that for the future. And that's really how we create the wisdom. And so they allow that space and create the habit of reflection and pulling that learning forward into the future. I think, at least my experience in the companies I've worked for in the United States and in Australia, at the end of a project, we'll do sort of a quick plus delta, what worked well, what didn't, but we're really focused on like the outcomes and maybe some of the actions or the things that were the steps that were taken, but not so much of going deeper into what were the things that we were thinking, what were the deeper assumptions we made. And Toyota has a much more, from what I have learned from Mr. Yoshino, a much more rigorous process of really deeply examining what has happened so that there can be adjustments for the future. And I think this has been a helpful concept for me, for myself, and then for the organizations I work with as well, is we need to go deeper in our reflection process, because that's really where we're going to uncover the assumptions and the thinking, which is really what impacts the outcomes that we're seeing. And so how do we do that more? How do we take a little bit more time opposed to be running around and get on to the plan, do, and get on to the next thing? How do we really learn and reflect and take the adequate time for that?
Yeah, and I think this raises interesting questions about the world today being frantic, wanting to get change, and with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, there's lots of pressures for change to drive the short-termism. How does a leadership approach like this deal with times of great uncertainty and the need to drive forward when we don't know all the answers? Do you have any insights from Mr. Yoshino about that?
So, well, I know one quote that comes to mind that just always I've been reminding myself of a lot lately is one from Mr. Yoshino, where he said, having patience requires a lot of patience. So even for ourselves, we know we need to be patient, but we have to be patient to be patient. But he would say one of perhaps the criticisms of Toyota is that it's a little slower to react. And so because they want to gather more information and to study more, but that's not always necessarily a bad thing, but that maybe they're not as out there reacting or moving as quickly. And but it served them well in many ways historically. But again, there are different parts of the company. Like there are certainly part of the company focused on innovation and being out there and being more agile and product development. But even, for example, in Toyota, this is a long time ago, of course, so things have changed, I'm sure, in the many years, 40 years since Toyota decided to enter the foreign market. But he told me that, Toyota didn't want to be the first Japanese automaker to enter the US market. They waited for Honda and Nissan to go first so that they could learn from their experiences and what worked well and what didn't. So they were sort of, in part because they were being slow to make some decisions, but also in part because they wanted to get more input. And then they ended up being the dominant car maker in the market. So it's hard to know, and again, Mr. Yoshino hasn't been at Toyota for a few years, so I don't know how it's going for today.
Okay. I would like to talk about how people who are interested in Lean, how they can start developing some of these ideas in the workplace that is not conducive to this type of thinking. Just think about maybe a young manager who likes these ideas, but he's surrounded by the usual structure to get things done. What advice do you have for somebody in that position who's just starting out?
Yeah, so great question. And I'd say that's probably the more common situation. Most of us aren't working in organizations that already have this really deep culture of learning in place, and one where there's a lot of patience for focusing on the process, not just the outcomes. And there are a few things, and it depends on where you are in the organization. But I'd say no matter where you are, you can always start with yourself and to find the ways to slow down just a little bit more for yourself and not be as reactive. So one thing that I've done for myself, and I help coach other people too, is really to be aware of what is your purpose in a specific moment. Are you there do you have ownership of a problem or a situation? And in which case, you should be running with doing all the problem solving, or are you managing a team and you're there to really help support them to do some of the problem solving, to help do that provide the support, the teaching and the mentoring. And in that case, asking more questions and to help maybe doing more guiding the way is important as well. And so we run around so much wearing different hats throughout the day. So to take it, what I call an intentional pause, and really remind yourself of what's my role in each individual moment, and then what's the most effective behavior to show up with. Because I think we default to being the experts and wanting to have the answers. But if we all are leading with all of our answers and advocating, we're not allowing the space for learning. And I think that goes at all levels of our organization. If you're, even if you're, independent contributor as well. How do we ask a few more questions to draw out other people's thinking and not just always advocate for our own ideas, which is important too, but it's about being intentional around it.
Yes. I want to come on to something you mentioned right at the start, which is you've set up your own company. Could you tell me about some of the work that you do at your company? Particularly, I think you set up visits to Toyota and those sorts of things. Am I right?
Yes. And well, sadly, with the pandemic, my two sold out trips this year, weren't able to happen, but they will happen again. One of when we moved to Japan, I was very intentional, not just about spending time with Mr. Yoshino, but also thought I want to go out and learn as much as possible for myself and to make relationships and connections. And I had a glimmer of maybe an idea that in the future I could lead trips for other people in Japan. And that did end up, I was able to achieve that goal and have led a few trips and was supposed to have 2 this year. And the real goal and purpose for me in doing that is not only to take people to Toyota and some of Toyota's suppliers, but other organizations too, to learn about some of the culture of Japan, to go experience and have the same, in many ways, the same experience that I did, which has impacted my learning in sense of what we call lean, or even I had many agile practitioners come too, and it's been really eye-opening for them and helpful for them to think about how are they working with teams back in their home area. But to go to the shop floors or the school floors and to talk to the leaders and to observe and see with our own eyes. One of the principles of Lean or the Toyota production system is to go to Gemba, go to actually see what is happening and learn for yourself. And so my intention with these trips is for people to have that experience and get access to things they wouldn't be able to if they were just going to Japan on their own. So it's a lot of fun too. So I'm very sad that that didn't happen this year. But
I think this go to Gemba is often misunderstood by a lot of senior managers who think they're doing right. They'll go to Gemba. They might even take a big trip of managers to go and see a plant somewhere. And what they use Go Gemba for, I think they misinterpret it is, as a set of management team, they go and investigate and then come back and then draw up a report and then tell them what they should do. And they think, well, that's gone to Gemba. And I find myself trying to de-escalate that a little bit, to say, no, you need to go there without the power of your position. Just imagine you were one of those workers there or one of the junior managers. What are they being prevented from doing that you can say, ring up Joe from the spares department to say, go and fix this, because you have the power. So it's putting yourself in that position as well as seeing the position. So the people that come to Toyota, as you said, they have eye openers. What's the most common thing that they go, aha, or that was a real surprise?
So 2 things. I think one is that, yes, it's great to see the different tools and sort of the shiny objects in place, especially when you go to Toyota. It's quite impressive, but even some of their Toyota suppliers and other companies. But the big aha is that it doesn't necessarily come easy for these companies either. It's not like magic in Japan that all of a sudden everyone in Japan acts this way. And then how much passion there is from senior management to lead this way, and how much intention it really takes at all levels of the organization to create these systems and structures. So we also visit companies who are earlier in their journey, which is helpful because it's probably closer to many of the organizations that my participants come from. So they can see that the levels and steps of learning that happen. But I think a big aha is that it's not just the Toyota way is not the Japanese way. There are certainly elements of Japanese culture that have been helpful, but there are also elements of culture that have hindered what we consider lean.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. I remember a story. I used to work at Fujitsu, and we introduced lean there, but we didn't call it lean. We called it something else. And we won some awards, and I was talking to the president of Fujitsu, who was congratulating the team on winning these awards. And I said to him, I said, okay, when are we bringing this program to Japan? And he said, oh, I don't think it would work in Japan. And I said, well, that's strange. We learned it from you. So it's very typical. But Toyota is not typical. And I think that's a really, really important point.
Yep.
Okay. I want to come back to the book and writing this. There's clearly a very high regard between both of you, how you fashioned this book. So what do each of you or both of you want this book to be remembered for, say, 10 years from now?
Well, I hope Mr. Yoshino is still here 10 years from now. He's 76 now. And
it's possible.
Yeah, no, it's great. His mentor, who's 10 years older, is still around. And I was supposed to meet him this year, but next year when I'm back in Japan. Well, I'll speak for Mr. Yoshino and guess based on our conversations and also what he wrote in the foreword, is that he really wants this book. He's such a humble man. And he doesn't want people to see this as Mr. Yoshino or Isao Yoshino's biography. He sees his story as representative of many Toyota leaders and the experiences that they had. And of course, he has very unique experiences that are, I do have to put a plug in that he is a very unique and special person, and he did some things that are quite incredible. And also, had a lot of failures too. But he would say he'd want people to remember some moments in history that really showed how Toyota developed what he calls the chain of learning in the organization, and how he is just one part in that chain of learning, and what he learned from his mentors and bosses, and then how he has taken that on and passed that on to other generations. And in many ways, this book is another way that he is able to pass down that chain of learning. And I feel really fortunate to have worked with him. For myself, of course, through the process of working with Mr. Yoshino, if no one read it and only he had the experience of working with me, that would have been enough, because the experience we had of working together was really profound. But I would like this book to really remind people that we have focused too much on tools, too much on the outcomes, but really, if we get down to it, if we focus on the fundamentals of people-centered, human-centered leadership and on the concept of learning, we are going to be able to create so much, no matter what organization we're in, no matter what our systems and structures are. And so how do we get back and really be inspired by the humanity of leadership, of collaboration, of working together, and in creating value in whatever that is for our organization. So getting back to the fundamentals of purpose and people. So and so I'm very happy that a lot of the feedback of the book is that that's what's resonating for people about the humanity of leadership and getting back to just of the people-centeredness of it. So I really
and
continue.
Yes, it has that simpleness, that calmness, that reflection, and it does take a lot of patience.
Yeah.
But it pays off. It pays off, and it's quite clear. So I think this is a message for all leaders in whatever walk of life, that where learning is fundamental to prosperity, creating wealth for the organization, employees, and society. And we're at a time where we need to learn much faster and share and collaborate. So I want to leave on that note, but I'm going to ask now, where can people find out, one, more about your work, and two, where can they get the book?
Okay, great. And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, which was part of the sort of, I guess, the book launch. It was really exciting that the book hit #1 for lean management, as well as the coaching and mentoring. So I was really excited by that. Yes. It's available on Amazon in both the paperback and the Kindle ebook version right now. And it's available in most, most regions that Amazon serves. There's a few that don't, but the ebook should always be available for everyone. And also you can go to the book's website, which is simple. It's learningtolead.com. And you can also go to my website, which is kbjanderson.com. My middle name is Brian Jones, which was my birth last name. So those are my initials, and actually part of my Hanko, my stamp that I got made in Japan as well. And I'd love to connect with people. Of course, on LinkedIn and on Twitter, my handle is kbjanderson across the board. So you can find me there. And I'd love to hear how the book is resonating with you and what comments you have. I forgot to mention too, one of the really important things for me in writing the book was to create the reflection questions at the end. And so that this book is not just a story to be, to read and think, oh, that's great, but really challenge ourselves. This gets back to the last bit. How are you developing yourself? And so how can this book and Mr. Yoshino's stories also help you think about how you're leading, how you're growing, what is your purpose, and what might you do differently in the future? So thank you.
That's a great ending and a lesson for us all. Katie, that was a fascinating interview, and I learned a lot. You filled in a lot of gaps in my knowledge. So I want to say thank you very much. And I do recommend this book. It's a great read, and it'll take some patience and reflection to go along with it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Amazing talk, amazing conversation, and a real pointer to what is important nowadays. It's not about rank, it's not about tools. It's really about who you are and what to look after. I mean, in terms of reflectiveness, in terms of, becoming actually more conscious and aware of what's going on. Thanks so much, Stephen and Katie. I'll bring you back here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for this conversation. Again, I really invite everyone to follow your work. You mentioned websites. Stephen has a website. You're all on social media, actively present. And whoever wants to stay in touch with you and go deeper, this was already deep. I think that's the opportunity. For now, I can only wish everyone a remaining great evening or a remaining great day wherever you are in the world. Yeah. And we're going to have a next session on October 5th. Simon Wardley will join us.
All right.
Will also be very interesting, the evolution of strategy and technology. So stay tuned, join us again. And for now, all of us, we just wish you also, to stay healthy, stay safe. It's challenging times, but I think from what we heard today, I think we can manage to get through and basically create a better future again. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye, everyone.